19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. Then with a rubber mallet from the backside, hit the tire, not the rim. That'll help break it free. Okay. Now take off your safety lug nut and remove the wheel. With a 14mm, I'm going to remove these 2 bolts here for your slider pins. Take these off all the way. With a little pry bar, I'm going to gently pry the caliper in before I remove it. This will help me compress the piston as much as possible. Okay, now you can take that off. Set it aside. I'm going to put it right here. You basically don't want any pressure on this hose. That'll damage it internally. These 2 bolts here are 15mm. Remove those. That'll take your caliper bracket off. Before I take this one all the way out, I'm going to break free this bottom one. Okay, remove them all the way. Take this one out. Take the top one out. And now you can remove your caliper bracket with the pads, and you can remove the old pads as well. Remove this T30 Torx that holds on your rotor. If you don't have an impact gun to do this, you can use an impact screwdriver, and what that is, it's a specialty tool that allows you to hammer on it while you twist it out. Otherwise, a lot of times these strip. My rotor is pretty stuck on here, so I'm going to use a hammer right in between the studs. That'll hopefully break it free from the hub right behind it. Try not to hit the studs because it'll damage the threads. Okay, that broke free. Grab it and wiggle it right off. Perfect. Next, I want to clean all this up, get out the brake dust off, all the debris. Use some brake parts cleaner and spray this off. Now with a wire brush, I'm going to brush off the hub. This one is very clean. Actually, a lot of times they'll be very rusty, in which case you might need a sanding disc of some sort just to scrub off all the surface rust that is there. Basically what you want to do is create a flat surface for the rotor to sit on. You don't want any raised areas, any rust bubbles or anything like that. And once we're done, I'm going to give it one last rinse. And now with some anti-seize, I'm going to cover the whole hub. Try not to get it too much on the brake shoes. What this is going to do is prevent rust from building up in the future, and it'll prevent the rotor from sticking. I'm also going to spray a little extra in that hole for the securing screw. That way it doesn't get stuck in there in the future. Now we can take the new rotor, slide it on. Now this is the performance rotor. If you had the regular flat rotors, there would be an oily coating on it, in which case you would have to clean it off with some brake parts cleaner. Make sure that the hole for the screw is lined up with the hub. And at this point, I can hear that the parking brake is actually adjusted perfectly. It has very, very minimal drag. I can just barely hear it touch, which is what you want. If not, if you had to, for some reason, expand it to make the shoes a little tighter, you would turn this star adjuster wheel either one way or the other, whichever way you need it to go, either expand or contract the shoes until they are perfectly lined up. And like I said, you just want a little bit of drag on it. You don't want it to actually stop this from turning. So set that on, and now let's get the caliper bracket ready. With a wire brush, I'm going to scrape off all the rust. Just like on the hub, this is actually not too bad. You want to have a nice flat surface for these to sit on. If it doesn't sit flat, then what it does is actually squishes the pad in between the two ends, and then you get braking issues. So I'm applying a little bit of grease for rust protection, and then take the new piece of hardware, slide it on all the way, and let's do the same thing to the other side. A little bit of grease. You don't need too much. If you put too much on here, it'll actually squeeze out from underneath that anti-rattle clip, and it'll get on your rotors, which is not good. Set that on. And now, one last thing to do is to clean up the slider pins, remove them from their boots, wipe off the old grease. Now, if yours are stuck, seized, and rusty, you can try to heat up here and work it back and forth, spray some rust penetrant in there, break it free, and if they are rusty, more than likely they have damage along this shaft here, in which case you'd need to replace them. But if yours look nice and clean, free of rust and any debris, you can reuse them. And same goes for in here. If it was rusty, you'd have to clean it out with a wire or a bore brush. Mine is actually clean, so what I'm going to do is add some new grease to the remaining old grease that's in there. I like to put it inside of the boot because that kind of acts as a reserve of grease in there. Grease up the slider pin, and the reason I put it inside the boot is because if you put too much on here, it'll just get squeezed out as you try to press it in. Make sure you get enough grease to get onto that lip there. That's where the boot seals up, and if there isn't any grease, water can make its way in. Press it down all the way. Give it a couple twists, and if there's any air in there and it won't let you press it down, press it and squeeze the boot at the same time. That'll squeeze out all the air. And do the same thing to this side. Reinstall your caliper bracket. I cleaned up the threads on these bolts. They had some old thread locker. If you want to put new thread locker on, go ahead. Definitely do not put any seeds or grease or anything like that. Snug them up, and then we'll torque them. 89 foot-pounds for these two bolts. Perfect. Go ahead and take your pads, put them on. I'm putting the inner pad with the wear indicator on the top. Now install your outer pad. Perfect. Make sure they are able to slide around freely. If they don't, that means there's too much rust here and it's compressing them inward, in which case they're going to get stuck and you'll have other braking issues. Now take your caliper, and as long as it's not wet, make sure you inspect it. If it is wet, that means it's leaking. Take a little bit of grease, add it to the outer ring of this piston, as well as these two ears here. That's going to help the pads operate quietly and smoothly. Now you can take your caliper, and if the piston isn't retracted enough, you can do that now, but for me it is, since I used the pry bar at the beginning. Slide it over the two pins here, press it down all the way. Let's install the two bolts. Bottom these out, then we'll torque them to 20 foot-pounds. 20 foot-pounds. Perfect. Reinstall this screw here. Snug that up. Don't forget to take the cap off your old rotor, put it back in here. That's going to prevent water from going in. And this is actually a hole for adjusting your parking brake shoes if for some reason they need to be adjusted. Reinstall your wheel. Okay, 100 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check it.